Get started. Welcome to our webinar on outcome-driven venturing, how to build the right solutions and build them right. So I'm Tony Ulwick. Thanks for joining us. I want to start by introducing our panel members, Noel Sobelman and Griffin. Both of them are principals at the consultancy Change Logic. For the past 25 years, Noel's worked in growth strategy development, innovation capability building, portfolio management, and digital enablement. He's widely recognized for bringing a practical and effective approach to companies looking to ignite change. And those had several high-profile new venture programs that have received national recognition. Now, Christine also has 25 plus years of experience as both a strategy consultant and an entrepreneur. She leads Change Logic's growth practice, serving Fortune 500 companies and startups in a range of industries, including technology, insurance, healthcare, autonomous vehicles, and adaptive learning. Her previous consulting work at McKinsey & Company was focused on business model innovation. So welcome to you both.
Thank you, Tony.
Now, Noel, you're going to kick off the webinar with a little background on today's topic, so take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. I think I'll start with some history. I'd like to be optimistic and think that transformative or new growth innovation has really come a long way since serial entrepreneur and educator Steve Blank published the 4 Steps of the Epiphany back in, I think it was 2005. He made the observation that startups are not smaller versions of large companies. And then many of you know this story. His former student, Eric Ries, published The Lean Startup in 2011, where he introduced Agile, Build, Measure, Learn as a build on Blank's customer development process. He helped popularize MVPs, learning metrics, metered funding, the concept of a pivot. Around the same time, thought leaders like Ash Mora, Brant Cooper, David Benetti, Tristan Comer, and many others have really advanced this thinking, the practices, and continue to build on the approach. Somewhere along the way, we added, this movement added the business model canvas, which really helped us think beyond product and service innovation. And then there's a mix of elements of design thinking have been mixed in along the way. So if we fast forward to today, established corporations now have a methodology and really a growing tool set for ideating, incubating, and scaling new sources of growth. So today we want to focus on another significant build to these methodologies. We're going to focus in on jobs to be done. And Tony, Christine, and I feel really strongly that integrating jobs to be done to the front end of your innovation process is really a key to improving its effectiveness. So Tony, I'm going to start with you. You've been perfecting an approach for turning jobs theory into practice for over 20 years now. So I can't think of anybody better than yourself to kind of kick us off and ground us all in with an overview of jobs to be done fundamentals. But I really want, the second part of my question is I really want to zero in on how jobs to be done application might be different when you're applying it to this transformative innovation space where you're dealing with extreme uncertainty.
Excellent. So I'll get started. Noel, I prepared a few slides for this. I thought it might be a bit easier to share these with the audience. So let's talk about this. Of course, this space is near and dear to my heart. As Noel mentioned, it's pretty much been my career for 30 plus years. The goal of innovation, in my view, is to conceptualize solutions that are certain to win in the marketplace. But there's a catch here. You want to know that they're going to win in the marketplace before you start developing them. All right. So I like thinking about the process like this. And you're familiar with the typical stage gate approach, but we've changed this around a little bit. So up front, we see understanding needs, identifying opportunities, building strategy, and then ideating. This is what we refer to as the innovation process. So this is what I want to focus on. And in the materials that we sent out, as we mentioned, there's the need to do 2 things here: do the right things and do those things right. And Noel was mentioning a number of tools that have been developed over the years for products once they've been approved for development. And so what we're saying is that there's a tool set available to you to put on the front end that will make sure you're working on the right product before you even start with the development effort. Now that seems kind of hard to conceptualize, right? It's like you're saying that we're going to predict that this is a winning product before development even starts. That's the goal, right? That's what we've been working on for years, and that's what Jobs to be Done is all about. People buy products and services to get a job done. Okay, that's a known fact. The goal here is then to make the job the unit of analysis. And that means that companies must come up with winning solutions, solutions that get the job done significantly better or more cheaply. Right? So let's leave it at that for a second. So if we're saying winning solutions have to get the job done significantly better, the next question we would ask is, well, how do we measure better? Well, better means getting the job done faster, more predictably, higher output throughput. Just like any process that you'd attempt to improve, whether it be your internal manufacturing process, a business process, or the process the customer is trying to execute, the job they're trying to get done. And what we're trying to do is to figure out how much better our new ideas or solutions that we're conceptualizing will move the needle. So as I'll explain in a minute, customers use a set of metrics to predict the success of getting their job done. Once we know those metrics, we can figure out the levels of satisfaction that are achieved by today's products and the new products that you're conceptualizing. So you can quite literally measure how much increase in customer satisfaction you're delivering from iteration to iteration. In other words, you can measure how much better you're getting the job done. Now, what we know is that in order to win in the marketplace, you can't just get a job done a little bit better. In other words, is anyone going to switch from a favorite brand to get the job done 1% better or 2% better? No, you have to get the job done significantly better, generally 15% or more. Now, what that means is we have to understand all the customer's needs, all the metrics. We have to drive value across the entire job to be done and systematically work over the years to get the job done perfectly. Now, in order to do that, we need a special set of inputs. And this is what we've worked on for a good number of years. This is why we call it outcome-driven innovation. For every step in the job that the customer is trying to execute, they are using some set of metrics to decide if they're getting the job done perfect. And you can think about this on your own, just like preparing a meal. There's a set of metrics that go on in your head. I want to minimize the likelihood of overcooking the meal or burning the meal. I want to minimize the time it takes to cook the meal. I want to minimize the time it takes to clean up after. These are metrics that you're using that measure the success in getting that job done. Now, I want to apply it here in this example to something far more complex so you can see the level of detail that we generally go through, especially in B2B markets. This one pertains to completion engineers, this is in the oil and gas space, who are trying to extract oil from an unconventional reservoir. So unconventional reservoir is not an oil well, it's rock basically, or rock formation. So the goal of this project was to figure out how you could disrupt fracking with a better solution. And you can see here the steps that completion engineers go through to try to get the job done. So those steps are what we call the job map. And then underneath them, you can see the outcomes. Now, what I want you to do is to focus on those outcomes for a second and notice what they aren't first. These aren't statements that say, oh, get the job done faster, better, cheaper, make it reliable, make it safe. These are very specific instructions. Again, we call them desired outcome statements. They all start with a direction of improvement, have a metric that can be measured and controlled in the design of the product, have a contextual clarifier, and so on. So number 34, for example, minimize the likelihood that friction resulting from fluid pumping reduces the pressure exerted on the formation. Or 36, minimize the likelihood that the pressure applied on the formation is reduced due to leaks. Now, if you're trying to enter this market, what you want to know is what the entire job is from beginning to end, and you want to know where to focus to create your minimum viable product. And what are people willing to accept? Do you just want to play in step number 5, where you just create the fracture? Do you want to play in just step 6? So obviously, many companies want to own the whole job, right? This is a lot of software companies do, and this is what a platform play is all about, right? This is what we push our clients towards who are trying to enter new markets. Own the platform, right? Own the platform that gets the entire job done. But before you can do that, you have to know what the entire job is and how people measure success along each step of the way. So that's the first part of this, right? But then you can only imagine with all those different outcomes, the next question is, well, which ones should I focus on? Which ones are the most important, least satisfied that I need to address so my product will be adopted in the marketplace? So as part of our approach, we apply a quantitative element as well, where we put out a survey that includes all these statements, and we ask completion engineers to tell us, how important is it to you that you're able to minimize the time it takes to determine which fractures are enabling hydrocarbons to flow, for example? And given the solution that you use today, how satisfied are you with your ability to achieve that outcome? Now, from that, we can see which outcomes are very or extremely important and very extremely satisfied. And we put them through an algorithm that says if they are very important and poorly satisfied, then that means they're underserved. So this is where we would focus on getting the job done better. So we apply it to all these metrics that customers use to measure success, and we can quickly figure out where the market's underserved and generally willing to pay more to get the job done better, and where the market's overserved, where they would like to pay less to get the job done worse. Now, the reason this is so critical, if you're trying to win in the marketplace, you want to get the job done better and more cheaply. Right? If you're a new market entrant, you got to get the job done better and more cheaply than your competitor. Like Uber did, for example, like Netflix did. You're getting the job done better and cheaper. So you need to know both sides of the equation. Where do people want more value? And then where are people willing to give up value to save on price, right? And once you have this information, you know where to focus to get the job done better and cheaper. So this is the power of jobs to be done once you take it to that next level, which is understanding all these outcomes people want to achieve. There's one other key element here. I'm sure you all know this. Customers don't agree on what needs are unmet. And in nearly every market we've pursued, there's differences of opinion. Half the market may think outcomes 10, 20, and 30 are really important and unsatisfied. Another half may think another set of outcomes are really important and unsatisfied. So what we do to find segments of people with different unmet needs is to actually segment around the unmet needs. Now, most companies can't do this because they don't agree on what a need is, what the needs are, or which are unmet. But we've addressed all that as part of the approach, so we can pinpoint with the level of accuracy segments, we call them hidden segments of opportunity. Now, why do we say hidden? We say hidden because if you use traditional segmentation methods around demographics, psychographics, behavior, attitude, you won't see these segments. They are pure needs-based around outcomes. Now, once we know what those segments are, we can figure out, well, why are they underserved or overserved, and create, I could use the word persona, I guess, but a segment description that describes what unserved needs they have and why. So I'll give you a quick example. This here comes from a study we did in the tooth restoration market. It was dentists filling a cavity, basically. And we found a segment on the left that was highly overserved. And this was because they were focused on patients that had healthy gums and required just a small filling. But over on the right, we found a segment that was highly underserved. Same job, filling a cavity. But this segment was focused on patients that had unhealthy gums and required a large filling. So in that case, with unhealthy gums, they tend to bleed more, which impacts visualization, which makes it harder to keep the area dry. It makes it harder to contour the bigger filling. So in that situation, they're underserved.
So Tony, let me jump in here, and I want to
Sure.
come back. I want to come back to this and really zero in on. I think what you're saying is the methodology you're presenting us with is really no different when you're out in the high uncertainty, what we've been calling transformative innovation space. It's still some of the same principles apply, if I understand you correctly. But I want to turn to Christine though and give and talk about. So that's a great overview of some of the tactics of applying jobs to be done theory in practice. So Christine, can you take us to the back end and talk about ideate, incubate, and scale? You've had tremendous amount of experience over your career actually helping companies ideate, incubate, and scale new businesses. Maybe you can walk us through that, and then we'll talk about how they both play together.
Sure. Okay. We look at ideation, or we look at innovation in 3 disciplines: ideate, incubate, and scale. In the ideate portion of this is where jobs to be done is infinitely important, because you're trying to identify customer problems and develop solutions. In the incubate phase, you're looking to go into the market and actually test your ideas and validate hypotheses that you have about what the solution is and how effectively it meets the customer's need. And finally, you're looking to scale it. And when you're scaling, that's when you're trying to reallocate assets and find the capabilities needed that will help you grow this business. I wanted to put a little language around this so that as we talk about it, you can understand where the jobs to be done techniques fit into this. In the beginning, it is about setting an ambition for a company. You need to say, what it is that you're trying to accomplish, how big this ambition is. And then you start looking at what we call hunting zones. And those are the markets or the places where you decide that you want to play. Hunting zones can be defined by a place where you see a set of customer problems or jobs to be done. So there are multiple jobs to be done that are attractive in that market, in that segment. You have assets that you might want to leverage, or you can find assets that you want to get and acquire them. And maybe there's no dominant ecosystem player. So you're kind of narrowing the field to decide where you want to play. We begin to look at the jobs to be done in those markets and develop concepts and solutions based on that. Many of you are familiar with a business design canvas. At this point, we begin the incubation phase, and we usually start by putting in place business designs. This is a one-page summary. The other day, someone called it a prototype, and it is a very specific description of the solution and value proposition. It includes an analysis of the ecosystem and potential adoption chains that are in there. And it talks about how you're going to make money and how you're going to deliver this. This is a part where jobs to be done is really important because, as Tony's described, there is an incredible amount of precision that jobs to be done brings to putting this down on paper for the first time. You have a clear understanding of the value proposition, and those elements of your solution that are most important and most valuable to a customer. And that shapes all the work that you do from that point. You'll go into this incubation phase trying to validate your solution. You'll be piloting the product through customer trials, and selling experiments are also a part of incubating. One thing really important to know is that, unfortunately, users don't always do what they say they're going to do. And so we design selling experiments in market where consumers transact value. So they prove to you that they see the value of your proposition. Once you get enough evidence in the incubation phase, then you begin to scale that. And that means you need to acquire the customers, the capabilities, and the capacity needed to scale this business. When I think about where firms struggle along this journey, there are different points in each phase. In the ideation phase, two of the problems that people have are that they believe that more ideas is always better. And that often leads to something we call the ideation zoo. So you do want to have hunting zones, and you do want to put boundaries around your ideas so that you're not ideating things that aren't directly related to the achievement of your ambition. When you look at the incubation stage, part of the problem is that they lack a discipline around experimenting. You have to be very precise in how you structure an experiment. Try to be hypothesis driven, where you have an idea, and you don't have to be wedded to that idea or notion or element of a solution, but you have an idea about where you want to start and how you want to test it. Again, the jobs to be done methodology will help you get more precision so that you are already off to a running start when you're trying to incubate. And again, the things that you're incubating might not just be around the solution, but around the adoption chain or around the partnerships and the ecosystem. So you're experimenting in that section around all elements of your business design. And finally, scaling is the part of the whole innovation process where we believe people have the most difficulty. And part of the reason is that you forgot to set the stage for scaling from the beginning. When you are working with your team to set that ambition and to connect your innovation to that ambition, it's a really important thing so that by the time you get through this process and you've invested your time and money, you are able to go back to those leaders, and they are engaged and committed and understand why they are investing in your product. The other problem in scaling is that there is the temptation to push the accelerator too hard or too quickly. You need to be, very thoughtful about how you invest and have a plan for that. We call that never invest ahead of learning. So I think Noel, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Christine, I want to underscore something you said that's important, that kind of where I see the power in jobs to be done and Ideate, Incubate, Scale working together. And it has to do with say versus do. Tony, you described a very precise method for really getting to the customer unmet need, the outcome they're looking for. I believe you still need to go out and run experiments like Christine described and get evidence that they actually, instead of just surveys or interviews, we look for evidence or proof points in the form of value exchange, where whether it be providing their credit card information or their a letter of intent or other proof points, that value exchange or some kind of currency. So we call that what the customers actually do versus what they say they'll do in a survey. So I think that's an important point you brought up, Christine. Christine, can you maybe give us a quick example from, a real example from your experience of a company that you've taken through all the steps of Ideate, Incubate, and Scale? And more importantly, what are some of the key lessons you learned?
Yeah, I think we had a client in Austria that we worked with that established an autonomous unit for investigating net new business opportunities. One of the things that was really important is that they had a leadership team with an audacious CEO. He had this ambition of growth, and they had the innovation unit leader had a tenacious and disciplined process for how he moved through the innovation journey. They had very clear set of hunting zones in the beginning. They picked three hunting zones that were net new to the company. They focused very intently on jobs to be done. They used an agile sprint method that provided momentum and intensity. So they operated in 30, 60, 90-day increments. And they worked from a business design, which gave them a discipline and a set of hypotheses that they worked with. And it was really interesting to see the rigor and the intense scrutiny that the hypotheses got at each step of the way. They were crystal clear hypotheses, and they were also using feed forward metrics. This is another thing that we see successful companies doing. I mean, one example of, as you're experimenting is you may think about, well, I have a platform and I have 1 million users, but the real variable is how many active users and how many people return to and continue to use the platform. So it's not an end result, but it's a feed forward metric that indicates that your hypotheses are on track. And finally, I would say this autonomous unit also did a really good job of stopping initiatives at the right stage. So they knew and they were willing to say, okay, we've learned enough. We have invalidated our hypotheses and it's time to stop.
Thanks, Christine. So let's talk about, now we've covered jobs to be done and lean innovation or Ideate, Incubate, and Scale separately. Let's talk about how they're used more about how they're used together. So Tony, how do you know when you've done enough jobs to be done work and it's time to begin ideating, or is it more of a parallel process where you're iterating jobs to be done application and you're starting to ideate in parallel? Can you offer your opinion on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we don't begin ideation until after we know all the facts, right? So what are you going to ideate around? Once we know what segments we want to go after, once we know what unmet needs we want to target, and once we've agreed upon the multiple strategies that we may have to pursue, like in that dental example, then we begin ideation. Right. So in the dental example, they could brainstorm ways to satisfy the 10 unmet needs, and I think it was 39% of the market. Or they could brainstorm new platform level solutions that would work in that most difficult case. Right. So, we don't believe in starting ideation until after. So it's like you're trying to define the problem. I think Einstein said it right. It says if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 59 minutes trying to define the problem and then come up with a solution. It's the same concept, right? We want to know with a great level of detail exactly the target, exactly what we're trying to achieve. And once we know that, it generally works pretty well. Like the way I say this is, what are the chances that a team would just randomly come up with a solution that addresses 20 unmet needs in a segment if they didn't know the segment or those needs existed? And the answer is pretty slim. But if you were to put that information in front of a team, what are the chances that they'd come up with great solutions? And the answer is excellent, right?
Yeah, I love the phrase, fall in love with the problem, not the solution. You can jump too quickly to solution mode. Let's turn our attention to business model innovation for a second. And I got a real example, Tony, that, or Christine, either one of you, you're doing jobs to be done with a company that sells tools that drill holes. Maybe your customers, maybe you find out that your customer's biggest problem is finding skilled construction trade talent. So it's a much higher level of abstraction. And so how do you deal with that if your problem comes back and it's outside the scope of the immediate scope of what you're thinking about when you went into the process looking for better drills when there's this bigger problem out there for your customer?
Yeah. Christine, you want me to go first?
Sure. Go ahead, Tony.
Okay, so I mean, the way we look at this, and we look at this more proactively, Noel, so it shouldn't come as a surprise. Let me just, if I can share a screen again. What we like to think about is, and what you just defined was what we call an adjacent market, right? The core market was X, right? They're trying to get some job done, but you learn when you go out and talk to them that those people are trying to get more jobs done, other jobs done. So in our survey work, we actually ask people, what are the other jobs that you're trying to get done when you're getting the core job done? Could be before, during, after, so on. Now, the reason this is critical is you already have a relationship with this executor. So if you can help them get more jobs done, that's a great way to expand, right? The other direction is great too. If you want to have other people get the core job done, you can grow new executors, and that increases the size of the market. So that's nice as well. And of course, there's just to fill in the blank. You may have new executors getting new jobs done, just higher risk, as you mentioned earlier, because you don't have technology in the marketplace or those capabilities, and you don't have a relationship with that client. So that's how we think about that. But we want to proactively figure out these adjacencies so that we can, not only suggest to clients that here's how to grow your core market, but here's the next few markets that you may want to go after.
And Noel, in the early days, when we are thinking about scaling, even before we start the process of incubating things, we look into a market and try to say, well, what are the jobs to be done? What are solution clusters that are in that market? And how might they fit together in a path that would allow you to scale? My favorite example is Best Buy. Best Buy Health started out with the basics of providing electronic services into a home through their agents, through the Geek Squad. And what they did next is they said, well, we're already in a home. We could probably help people with their health technology in a home, or technology that keeps elderly people safe at home. And so they were looking to leverage their existing assets into other customer bases capabilities. And so we try to think about that in the beginning as part of the scaling story, because you may choose to focus, as Tony said, on one core job. But if you look at the jobs that are around it, you can see that that's potential areas where you may grow, and you can leverage what you're building. And so we'll talk about that as an entry point. Where are you going to start? Where can you go?
Yeah, and we'll go to, I want to go to John for some questions here in a second. But the other thing I think at play here, and we haven't talked much about the governance of this process. I think, and you pointed it out earlier, Christine, about it starts with establishing an ambition for your company. And I think it is leadership's role to set some opportunity size guidelines for the team. Mm-hmm. If you're a drill company and you want to 10x your growth, making a better drill isn't going to get you there. So I think leadership has a role to play in figuring out scale of the ambition and providing those ground rules for the teams. So John, let's turn to you. How are the questions coming in, and what are some of the upvoted questions? I think we have time for one or two.
Sure, excellent. Yeah, we definitely have a group of some great questions coming. A great conversation so far. You guys are doing a wonderful job. So right off the top, the most top voted question from Miki Tokala: if senior management is product driven, how do you convince them to invest in researching customer problems and desired outcomes? One might be for Tony.
Yeah.
I'll go first. Sure. Yeah, we run into this all the time. It's really about mitigating risk. Executives are very incented to mitigate risk, improve time to market, and create products that customers want. So you can combine all of those three things together by doing some of this research up front. And it's not as if everyone has to wait for the research to get done for weeks before they can start taking action, because a lot of times we have a job map ready within days, so they can start beginning to think about, well, what is the platform? What does it have to do? What might our minimal viable product have to address? And then, as we get detail on the outcomes and which are unmet and segments, you can start fine tuning all that. So I think a lot of it just needs to be, the motivation on the financial side, and then having them know that this is technically possible. And of course, it's different than what they may traditionally be trying to do.
I think that's one problem that we face going into particularly technology companies, is that they have an idea, they have a solution, they have a product orientation that they want to pursue. If we build it, they will come. One of the things that we do in terms of changing the human part of innovation is that we get the executives to go out of the building. In one case, there was a client that we talked about that had to wear a diaper because we wanted them to have that experience and understand and be empathetic to the customer. And we often have the executives in the marketplace, in the stores, in a home, looking at what the customer is doing with their product. And when they have that aha moment, it begins to kind of unlock what the potential is of actually looking at innovation in a different way.
Yeah, apply some of your empathy tools to your own leadership team and really understand what their motivations are. How about another one, John? I think we have time for one more.
Excellent. Yeah. So this question is getting a lot of activity from Dennis. When would you find that the incubate stage disproves the segmentation/ODI analysis? Does this happen? If so, to what degree?
Is that?
Well, I think you have to be prepared for. My opinion is you have to be prepared for that, and it gets back to what the point I made about say versus do. If despite your best efforts up front to really nail the outcome that the customer is looking for, and when you get down to getting evidence for that, and it's not going along, it's not validating the solution path you're on, you need to be prepared to pivot. Maybe it's not the solution. Maybe you had the wrong customer. Maybe you had the problem wasn't nailed, or it could really be customer problem or solution that you need to iterate on. So I do think you need to be prepared for that.
And it could be, some other part of the business design, like maybe there is an adoption chain problem, right? Maybe the end user really wants it, and that's the job they were trying to get done, but somehow the ecosystem isn't lined up. It's like stay flat tires, that consumers wanted them, right? But they didn't. It turns out that the people who manufactured them didn't put the right service system and the service network in place to serve those tires.
Yeah, I'd say at a very high level, what ODI does is it will help you cut out the number of iterations in your experiments as you go downstream, because it's factored in upfront what customers want, and you focus in the right area. So then the question is, are we executing the solution correctly? Which is, half the battle is knowing where to focus. The other half of the battle is making sure you're addressing it correctly. So doing that experimentation downstream generally validates that the needs are underserved and that the solution is going to address them.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And that's, again, the power of combining jobs or integrating jobs to be done into this process. I think it does eliminate some churn, and maybe you can reduce the number of cycles and ultimately improve your time to value for your customer. Let's turn our attention to, you talked a little bit about needs-based segmentation, but let's talk about market selection. Can you both explain your approach to selecting the market, kind of that where to play?
Sure. I'll start, Tony. So we call the markets hunting zones, and we think it's really important to put boundaries around where you are looking based on your ambition. So, these have to relate directly to ambition. They probably address a megatrend in society. It could be emerging areas of opportunities that aren't mature, and they should have significant growth potential in them. If you look inside that market, you will see a pretty robust set of jobs to be done or customer problems that you want to solve that you think people are willing to pay for. So maybe there's some evidence of current solutions that you can already see before you select this market. It's probably an area where you have assets that you can leverage or assets that you can acquire, and there is not a dominant ecosystem player already. We do a lot of strategic analysis around a market. So how big is it? Who are the players that are involved? What are the current solutions in that market, and how are they distributed? So like kind of market map. And we look at any adoption chain issues or regulatory things that might get in the way of people pursuing or adopting your solution.
Tony, how about market selection from a jobs to be done lens?
Yeah, that's great, because everything Christine said I agree with, but let me just apply a few more filters to it through the jobs lens. When we find an attractive market, we'll start asking questions like, how many job executors does it have? Well, let me come in another way. Would you rather be in a market that has a lot of job executors or a few? Would you rather be in a market that's underserved or overserved? Would you rather be in a market where the number of job executors is growing or decreasing? Would you rather be in a market where people are willing to pay more or not? Right. So we apply these filters. I think we have our tool that we use has about 42 different metrics, many of which Christina mentioned, but then these other jobs we done related ones too. That even like frequency of job execution. Is it a job that's done once a year, or is it 5 times a day? All these things make one market more attractive than another if you're looking through the jobs lens. So adding that to your criteria on top of everything Christine says, I think, again, brings the synergy to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I'm thinking about a situation like, remember Instagram started out as a digital photo image filter application? How do you make sure you're not missing out on an opportunity for social photo sharing, which took it to it's catastrophic height in terms of its value. So selecting that right market, is just so critical. Let's talk about customer discovery, and then we'll I want to leave plenty of time for more Q&A at the end here. In the customer discovery, there's lots of approaches, from design thinking, empathy interviews, ethnography, journey mapping, surveys. We've talked about some of them on this call. Follow me homes. Can one of you provide some guidance on which techniques are best fit for which situation, and maybe Tony, if you can, let's start there. Which ones are best fit for which situations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's interesting because all methods can work if you know what input you're looking for. So in other words, if I know I'm looking for outcome statements from customers and I'm going to create a job map and capture outcomes, I can do that using any of the techniques you described, right? One-on-ones, group interviews, small interviews, big focus, it doesn't matter. Some are more effective than others, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the key point is, if you know what input you're looking for, any interaction with the customer can produce the input. Right now, having said that, we do have our preferred method that we call customer immersions, which are generally with 3 or 4 people at a time. And the trick here is we spend about 3 to 4 hours with them. And through those 3 or 4 hours, we have them describe to us their job map, their outcome statements, and we're collecting, building as a team, reaching consensus on this for over a 3 or 4 hour period. In essence, what we're doing is we're teaching them what inputs we're looking for, and we're teaching them how to give them to us. Now, this is in stark contrast to a lot of research, because in many cases, the researcher and the interviewee don't know what inputs they're looking for. So they're just having a conversation, then they get this giant transcript, and then you look through it later and try to mark off things that you think are the needs. We don't do that. We don't leave the interview with a transcript. We're showing the interviewee the outcomes like in a Zoom meeting, or up on a wall if you're back in the old days. And they're working with us to build out the set of needs in real time. So we're getting real-time validation. Now, you could do that using many of the techniques that you've talked about, but it's less about the approach. Like it's not about, is it a one-on-one? Is it about observation? Is it ethnographic? It could be any of those. The key is, no matter what situation you're in, the goal is to capture the right inputs, and you can make it a lot easier on yourself by just doing it the way we've just described.
And I think as you get into things like usability during the incubation phase, where you're putting a prototype into, or an MVP into someone's hands, it's valuable to be in the context, in the moment that they're using your product. Typically that might be in their home, in the store, in the office, in the factory. But you want to, the gold standard for that would be in the room in some kind of ride-along capacity. The other thing that we try in incubation is, and there are hundreds of different ways to test and experiment. One of my favorites is the story about a client who needed to validate that a person was the right age to purchase their product. And they did something called the Wizard of Oz. So they had a vending machine where you had to actually insert your license to prove that you were 18 years old in order to purchase the product. And instead of creating all the technology and the AI needed, they actually sat inside the vending machine and saw whether or not people were willing to put their ID into the machine. And so there are, real in-market tests that you're proving a transaction of some kind of value that in the incubation phase are very important.
So contortion is a key skill in that.
Hey, it depends on how big the vending machine is.
Yeah, there you go. So thanks for that, guys. So Tony, can you give us an example of a company that has implemented what we've been talking about from end to end, jobs to be done, and it might be something that didn't work and we've learned from the failure, or something that did work. Can you think of a good example, and then we'll go to questions?
Sure. Yeah, I can think of one. We worked with Kroll OnTrack. It was actually OnTrack back at this early time frame, as they wanted to enter the electronic evidence discovery market, which was new at the time. And they had a great technology. If you've ever broken a hard drive or that kind of thing, send it to them. They can extract the data off the hard drive. And they had customers in the IT department in nearly every Fortune 500 company. And they thought, well, since we're so good at extracting data off hard drives, this should be an easy layup for electronic evidence discovery, because in the event that there's a lawsuit, we can go into an organization and extract all the data from the hard drives. Well, they tried that twice and failed twice. And then they came to us and said, what are we doing wrong? And the first thing we discovered is that, remember we talked about the adjacent market versus the new market? They thought they were in an adjacent market. They said, we already deal with IT people, so we're still dealing with IT people. But what they didn't realize is that the job executor changed. They were actually up in the new quadrant, because now the customer was the legal team. Mm-hmm. And the job wasn't to extract data from the hard drive. The job was to find information that would support or refute a case. Very different. So their first two iterations of the product only focused on getting part of the job done, which was to extract the data. But once they realized what the rest of the job was, they added some tools that allowed the legal team to search through this information to find information that would support or refute the case. That was the core part of getting the job done. So they became a leader in the space. They're still a top player. They won the Gartner Golden Quadrant Award for, I think, 10 years running. So they were very successful at applying it. And of course, on the back end, they use the techniques that Christine's been describing to incubate and so on. But getting the product right and knowing what job their actual customers trying to get done was all critical. And you can see they made some slip ups along each step of the way.
Thanks, Tony. So, wow, we've covered a lot. We've covered jobs to be done. We've covered ideate, incubate, scale. We've talked about market selection. We've talked about customer discovery. So a lot. Let's turn now to questions, and we've got about 10 minutes left. So I want to make the best use of that time and answer some more questions. John, what do we have uploaded?
Perfect. And Tony, if you want to bring up that Q&A slide on the screen while we go through these. All right. So we got another question that's getting a lot of activity. I have some comments on it as well from Joyce. I think I saw in the comment she's coming in from the Netherlands. So welcome, Joyce, or good evening to you. How do your respondents know in so much detail what their job to be done is? But look at the details from your oil example. It resembles a lot of requirements. I have found that people find it difficult to articulate their jobs to be done. I think that one might be right there for Tony.
Yeah, they do find it difficult because they're not used to describing it like that. But as I mentioned earlier, we quite literally teach them how to give us good inputs. We show them what they look like. We show them the format. We start extracting that way. And the line of questioning is pretty straightforward as well. What we do is we ask them, what are you trying to accomplish next? It's that simple. You know, for each step in the job, what are you trying to accomplish? And then what are you trying to avoid, right? I'm trying to minimize the time it takes to do this. I'm trying to minimize the likelihood that that bad thing happens. And through this, you can start going through and getting all the inputs that tie back to getting the job done faster and more predictably with higher output and throughput. So it's you know, what we're trying to, throughout the years, what we're trying to do is simplify this. I know it's a very complex process, but we tried to make it simpler and simpler over the years so that it's easy to extract the stuff, the information. But you're right, companies and customers are not used to talking about outcomes.
So, Tony, I have a follow-on for that. It sounds like what you're suggesting here, it does require some strong facilitation. So, you know, kids, do not try this at home on your own. Is part of what Stratagen does is to kind of teach your clients how to fish as well? Or do you find that they really do need that, at least that first cycle, a strong facilitator helping them?
We've come across all sorts of things, Noel, as you probably have too. You know, we've run into people who've never done outcome gathering before that are excellent at it right from the start. We've worked with others that struggle months later. It depends on your mindset, I think. If you can see past solution and think process, think underlying job, that helps. That really goes a long way because the conversation isn't about a solution. It's all in job space. It's in need space. So if you have that kind of mindset, generally you can start operating at it very quickly. And we worked with a company last year where we put nearly 300 people through a program to teach them how to do ODI. And within just a few months, they came back to us with results quantified with the innovation strategy put together so we could critique their presentation before it went on to their management. So all those things are possible. And of course, as a consultancy, we help people do the entire job too, if need be. Great.
John, let's grab another question.
Yeah, we got a few questions around platforms. So this one comes in from Gina. For companies that have internal platform teams that provide functionality for product teams, how would you apply this framework for figuring out the right platform innovation? And do you have examples where you advised companies on that? Kick that out to the group. See who wants to jump on that one first.
Well, I'll just start out by saying that it is important to separate platform from product development, or and that question, a lot of what we do is helping companies to kind of roadmap out a multi-generational plan, and a lot of companies need to think about when do we need to jump to a new S curve or a new platform. So there's some baseline capabilities that we look for in a platform-driven company. Tony, Christine, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, so it depends how I interpret the question, but I'm going to interpret that this is more like an R&D type question, and these platforms or technologies that you've invested in, and then there's product teams that are using these technologies for their products. If I'm assuming all that correctly, and then what we typically do is work with the product teams to see, what are the jobs those folks are trying to get done, and then inform the platform team where the needs are changing, where the opportunities are going, and that sort of thing, so they can invest in the new technologies that are needed to fill in the gaps and get the job done better over time. And if I misinterpreted that, sorry.
And the other part of the question was an example. I can think of a financial services client where we use these techniques to help at the, as Tony's saying, at the product level and the platform level to manage a backlog and figure out what should be prioritized in the backlog. But we did distinctly work with the platform and product levels separately. And managing those two different backlogs. How about another one, John? I think we have another 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. And just a quick note, just to point attention to, if you have additional questions throughout this that didn't get answered, and you'd like a free 45-minute consultation with us or the team, reach out to info@stratagen.com or info@changelogic.com, and we would love to help answer those questions related to outcome-driven venturing and this end-to-end innovation process. So please do reach out afterwards if you still have some questions. So this one is still along the lines of the platform, keeping in line with the platform theme. So if the goal is to be a platform, how might you do that when you can just have one piece of the total solution and usually work with partners to get other pieces done? What would the platform be in that scenario? So they're asking, if you are doing a part of if your solution is doing a part of I'll call it the job, and your partners are doing another part of the job, what would the platform be in that scenario? Or how would you handle that?
Yeah. So when we talk about coming up with a platform that gets the entire job done, what that sounds like is that particular person is that or company is only getting part of the job done, and that their solution does not have the potential to get the entire job done. So they have to rely on other people to get the rest of the job done. Now, that's okay, and you can build those partnerships, but the first thing I would check on is to see, do the technologies that the other people have, the other people that are getting the other parts of the job done, can those technologies potentially become a platform to get your part of the job done as well? If yes, you're probably going to be in trouble. You're going to get subsumed into a better platform, if you will. So I would certainly look at that. But in the meantime, if you're trying to build out the partnerships that get the entire job done, then and no one else has, and no one has an advantage over each other in terms of owning a platform that gets everything done, then piecing it together, integrating together an end-to-end solution makes great sense.
And I would say from a strategic point of view, we start out with our clients trying to understand where value is being created all along the value chain. So, and then you try to pick and play in that position. And if you don't have that as a capability or an offering currently, how would you go and acquire that? I mean, it goes back to the scaling plan, right? As you look at something in the beginning, we have one client, a semiconductor client, who is trying to move from being just components to being systems to being platforms, right? So they're trying to move up the stack and be that platform for other users to participate on. And so I think it's important strategically in the beginning to pick the right value spot to play so that you're capturing a larger portion. Think strategically about how you could get more through partnerships and ecosystems. And then finally, the other thing we would say is that the person who owns the customer has a lot of value, right? If you own that relationship, you can monetize that in some way. So platforms are important in that way too.
Yeah, and it seems to me that when you're dealing with an ecosystem of partners to pull together a solution, collaboration, you can certainly use these tools and techniques in a collaborative way with your partners. In a B2B2C example, you work together to figure out what the outcomes the customer at the end of the value chain are looking for. John, we're almost at time, but maybe we can squeeze in one more.
All right, here's one that's been up here. It came up during Christine's original part of the presentation. It might be a quick one for you, Christine. So where does the product market fit, when the product market fit is done along the ideation process, or where does the product market fit along the ideation process?
I would say that, with jobs to be done, your certainty is probably much earlier in the process, but it would be somewhere around the incubation phase, because you are not just looking at the value proposition, like does the offering meet the person's needs, but does the ecosystem support it? And so when we define product market fit, it is the moment that the customer is pulling it out of your hands, right? They've got to have it and they're willing to pay you for it. And so you need a clear picture of what that looks like, and jobs to be done helps you with that. And you need some actual in-market evidence that proves that it's a true product market.
Yeah, and I would just add, rather than what stage of the process that Christine outlined, it's really using your metrics. What are your behavioral metrics that really define that you're starting to get that point where it's being pulled out of your hands, and really pay close attention what the right metrics are at that point, whether it's in Incubate or Scale. So we're out of time, but this has been a great discussion. We probably could have gone on for another hour, I have a feeling. Please get in touch with us. The emails are on the screen here. We are offering to circle back for those of you that want to kind of have a more tailored presentation for your groups. Just get in touch with us. We'd be happy to help out. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.